All right, so we're going to be starting talking about cells. And this is from the level 2 book. That's those page numbers in that section. And we're going to be learning about the different types of cells in this video. Okay, so keep in mind, I'm going to be going a little fast. So feel free to pause, rewind, so you can get things written down. All right, so I don't teach you about a lot of scientists this year, but there are a few that I do want you to know. And I'm going to tell you about a few of those during this presentation here. So we didn't always know that cells were a thing. Okay, people had to develop the technology and then do a lot of experiments to understand that there are small living units that we later called cells that make up all living things, and they are the smallest unit of life. So Anton von Leeuwenhoek, so write down his name. He is given credit as the first person to see living cells. Okay, you don't need to write dates, but I just want you to know about when we're talking when we talk about Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Okay, now why was he able to see cells? He developed his own microscope. Okay, from what I understand, he made like eyeglasses, so he knew how to make lenses and things like that. He made a very simple microscope, nothing at all like the ones that we use. And he was able to see creatures in pond water. And if you take a look at this creature here in the picture, this creature here, I guess this pen isn't going to write. That's weird. This creature here is about probably about a millimeter across. Okay, it's something called a protist, and he was able to see those and see some detail to them with his simple microscope. Okay, you don't need to write this bottom one. They looked like little animals to him, and I guess the way people talked back then, he called what he saw wee beasties or animalcules. It's like little animals. I don't know. But Anton von Leeuwenhoek, what you need to know about him, credited as being the first person to see cells. Okay, Robert Hooke. Around the same time, he was looking at plant cells. So cork is part of tree bark, and he was looking at thin slices of cork. And his claim to fame, why we even know about Robert Hooke, is he called what he saw cells, because these little boxes down here in this bottom part of the picture, he thought they looked like little prison cells or the rooms that monks would live in a monastery, because those were called cells. So to him, they looked like little rooms, so he called them cells. So that's why we call cells cells, because of Robert Hooke. Okay, so you guys need to know about Robert Hooke. Again, you do not need to know dates. Okay, a few more scientists. Okay, 150 or so years later, Matthias Schleiden, he was a botanist, and he made the statement, and it was correct, that all plants are made of cells. So you have to know, you can just write down his last name if you want, Schleiden. Around the same time, Theodor Schwann, he made the correct conclusion that all animal cells or all animals are made out of cells. Okay, so you get this thing Schwann, kind of sounds like swan. So he's the one that made that statement about animals. And then finally, Rudolf Virchow. He was among many scientists who were trying to prove and have enough data to convince the scientific community that living things only come from other living things. Now, in 2020, or whenever you're watching this video, that might sound sort of like a dumb thing to have to prove to people, but there used to be a wrong idea called spontaneous generation. And what spontaneous generation was, it was an idea that living things could come out of non-living sources. Of course, it's nonsense, but it was what people had thought. So it took a lot of work by a lot of scientists to prove that you only get living things from other living things. So cells will reproduce and become other cells. Okay, living things can't just come out of nothingness. Can't just, spontaneously generate or just sort of come out of nowhere. Okay, so that was Rudolf Virchow coming up with that idea. Not coming up with, but really helping prove that idea that you only get things, living things from other living things. If you guys remember our first week of school, we said a characteristic of life is reproduction, and Rudolf Virchow is helping to show us that, yeah, living things reproduce, and that's how they make other living things. Okay, write down the top statement, cell theory. Now, cell theory probably should be called the law of cells. I don't know why it's still considered a theory, but for now it is. Cell theory is based on the work of what we were just writing down. Okay, cell theory is more of three statements that in the present day don't seem all that amazing. Okay, but at the time, these were somewhat kind of revolutionary ideas. Okay, so here's what cell theory says. There's three parts to it. First thing, all living things, and another word for that is organisms, are made of cells. So again, not super amazing right now, but to convince people and have data to prove that every living thing is made of these tiny invisible units called cells, that did take a bit of proving. Second statement, cells are the smallest or the most basic unit of structure and function in an organism. Structure means what an organism is made out of. Function means how it's able to do the things it does. So cells are the most basic unit of building a living thing as well as allowing it to do what it does. And finally, you only get cells from cells that are there reproducing. Cells only come from reproducing, other cells reproducing. So guys, please jot that down. Okay. Now guys, if I'm going a little quick, feel free to pause, okay? There are two main types of cells. The simpler type of cell is called a prokaryotic cell. A prokaryotic cell would be like a bacterial cell or these other cells called archaea. And we'll talk about those if we haven't already once we get to classification. But they are cells that do not have a nucleus. And they also don't have these little compartments inside of them called membrane bound organelles. They don't have those. And you'll see what those are as we kind of go through our study here. Now, they do have DNA, it's just not in a little pouch called a nucleus. So these are very simple types of cells. Those are our examples. You guys know what bacteria are. Archaea are sort of like bacteria, but they do have some slight differences, and they're usually found in areas of the earth that are pretty inhospitable. Okay, like around the rim of a volcano, spots where sun never reaches, areas like that. I do want you to write down. So you guys need pretty much need everything from this slide. I do want you to know that prokaryotic cells are smaller, and they tend to be less complicated than eukaryotic cells. They do have genetic material. It's just not found in the cytoplasm, or it's not found in a nucleus. It's just found in the cytoplasm, floating amongst everything else in the cell. All right, you and me are made of eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells are cells or a cell that contains its genetic information in a little spot called a nucleus, and that nucleus has a membrane around it. And they also have other little pouches surrounded by membranes inside of them. And those are called the membrane bound organelles. So things like mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, the nucleus, the chloroplast. You guys learned about these in a different grade, and we're going to go through them this year. Those are membrane bound organelles. Our cells have those. Prokaryotic cells do not. Okay. Examples of eukaryotes or eukaryotic cells would be these things called protists, fungus, plants, and animal cells. Protists are creatures that are sort of like a fungus, like a plant, or like an animal, but they don't have enough characteristics to be considered one of those. So they get their own grouping called protist. So guys, you really do need everything from this slide. Okay, so prokaryotic, if we're going to do a Venn diagram, this would go in the middle. Prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells all have a cell membrane. They all have cytoplasm. They all have ribosomes, and they all have genetic material. So every cell, that's the minimum that you have to have. Okay, only the eukaryotic cells have little rooms inside of them separated by membranes, and those are called organelles. In Latin, organelle literally means little organ, and that's a good way to think of it, because a little organ, you guys know organs do a specific job in your body, to take care of a major life process. That's what organelles are, just on a smaller scale inside of a cell. So you do need to know the definition of organelle, a subunit within a cell that has a specialized function. So you do need everything from this slide as well. Okay. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a very visual person and I like to see things to be able to understand them. So I just want to run you through this website here just to show you how small we're talking when we're talking about cells. All right, so let me see. I'm trying to just click on that. Oh, wait, and let me go to it. That's good. All right. So this is just this website called Cells Alive. And I like this because here is a person with their left hand holding this tiny pin. Let's see, make this bigger for you. Okay, so you could tell this is not like a big nail or anything like that. It's maybe something you'd use for sewing or something like that. So as we zoom in, we see the head of the pin has a head, and what they've done is they've draped a human hair over it, and you know how fine one human hair is. Okay. Now, if this is 2 millimeters, this head of this pin is probably 1.5 millimeters. So we're talking very small scale here. As we continue to zoom in, we can see now the head of this pin looks huge. Remember, it's only about 1.5 millimeters. So on a metric ruler, it's like 1.5 lines. The human hair kind of looks like a down tree, and you see these somewhat scary looking creatures. Okay, those are dust mites. Dust mites are invisible to the human eye, which is probably a good thing. They are found in bedding and couches and pillows, and they're found in everybody's couches and pillows and everything. It's not lice or anything like that. And they eat dead skin cells, and they are really not a bother to us at all. You may have allergies to them. And I know I do have like a kind of like a crunchy pillowcase cover that kind of helps kind of keep those sealed into the pillow. But those are dust mites. Okay, so they're invisible, and to them, a human hair is like climbing over like a couch or something like that. But we're still going to go smaller because all of these things are made. Well, not this. This is a protein, but the mites are made of cells. We're looking at this little ball right here. As we zoom in on the ball, which looks like, I don't know, a ping pong ball compared to this dust mite, we can see it's actually not a ball, but it's a collection of different things. Okay. And they're giving you some scale here, 20 micrometers. So that would be 0.02 millimeters. So we're very small here. And what we see, this big spiky ball, that's not a cell. That's a piece of pollen. Pollen has 2 sperm cells inside of it. Okay. Now this purple thing, that is a that's a yeast cell. All right. That is a cell. So that's how small we're talking. That's a eukaryotic cell. Here's a white blood cell from us. Here's a red blood cell from us. Those are eukaryotic cells. Okay, so they're smaller than pollen, pretty much to a dust mite. They're tiny. They look like a speck compared to them. And then in the middle, you see a few other things. The things that look like cheese curls, those are E. coli bacteria. So that's a prokaryotic cell. The ones that look like cheese balls, those are a staph type of bacteria, staphylococcus, okay, because they're round and they're in a cluster. Look how small the prokaryotic cells are compared to these larger by comparison eukaryotic cells, okay? And then in the middle, we have some viruses. Viruses are smaller than cells. Viruses are not cells. This one that looks like a hairpin, that is the Ebola virus. And these are different types of rhinovirus. They can cause the common cold. So viruses are not cells. We're not talking about those, but they are smaller than cells. Prokaryotic cells are tiny compared to eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells look like a small speck compared to these dust mites, which we can't even see with our eyes. We need a microscope. And all of these things are invisible when you're looking at this tiny, tiny little pin. Okay, so hopefully that helps you to realize how big or maybe how small cells really are. Okay, all right, and I think that's as far as I needed to go. So, guys, feel free to rewatch that, to rewind it, to get your notes done. And please let me know if you have any questions.